In 2008, Europe's economy could rival the United States. Today, the gap between them is larger than the entire economy of Japan. The United States surged to $27 trillion, while Europe flatlined at $17 trillion. The official story blames global shocks, yet one German corporation leaving home for China exposes a fatal flaw. What shattered Europe's fortune so completely, and could the same collapse threaten the rest of the world? In 2008, the United States and Europe stood shoulder to shoulder on the world stage, each with an economy worth around $16 trillion. The numbers told a story of equals. Europe even edged slightly ahead on paper. Fast forward to today and that symmetry is gone. The United States economy has ballooned to $27 trillion. Europe has barely moved, hovering near $17 trillion. The gap between them now exceeds the entire economy of Japan. That is not a crack, it is a canyon. Measured in growth, the contrast is even more brutal. Since 2008, the United States economy has surged by 87%. Europe managed just 13%. For every dollar Europe added, America stacked up nearly 7. The result is that what was once parity has become a one-sided race, with the United States pulling away at full sprint while Europe limps along the track. Per capita, the picture grows starker. In 2008, the average European economic output was about 3/4 that of an American. Today, it is barely half. Consumption, the money people actually spend, has fallen from near parity to a 57% gap. In practical terms, the average European now lives with less than 2/3 the spending power of their American counterpart. If these trends hold, projections get grim. By 2050, the typical European could be poorer than the average resident of Mississippi, the poorest United States state today. What was once unthinkable is now a credible scenario backed by the math. This story is not just about numbers on a chart. It is about a continent drifting from economic relevance, 1 percentage point at a time. And beneath those cold statistics lies the question: how did Europe, once the world's economic engine, end up stuck in neutral while America hit the gas? BASF's Ludwigshafen headquarters once ran day and night, a chemical city inside a city, powering everything from German car paint to global fertilizer. The scale was industrial and daily life in the region depended on it. In 2024, the board faced a spreadsheet that did not lie. Energy costs had soared to the point where making basic chemicals in Germany was a mathematical joke. Major production lines, including ammonia and caprolactam, shut down for good. 2,600 jobs vanished, jobs lost across the country, half of them from Ludwigshafen alone. The world's largest chemical producer, the historic anchor of German industry, was cutting costs by €500 million a year, and even that was not enough to keep the heart beating. While the boardroom lights flickered in Germany, BASF poured nearly $10 billion into a new megasite in Zhanjiang, China. The logic was brutal. China promised cheap energy, a growing market, and none of the grid chaos or regulatory whiplash that had become daily reality on the Rhine. The Zhanjiang complex would run on renewable power, crank out plastics and petrochemicals for Asia's booming demand, and employ thousands, just not in Europe. For the first time, the company's biggest single investment was not in Germany, but in a country where energy was affordable, and the future, at least on paper, looked brighter. The trigger was not just a bad quarter or a weak euro. The Nord Stream pipelines, once the arteries of cheap Russian gas, had been reduced to twisted metal on the Baltic floor. German industry lost its energy lifeline overnight. Electricity prices for factories jumped to 3 or 4 times what American or Chinese rivals paid. The old business model, American security, Chinese demand, Russian gas, collapsed in a matter of months. By December 2024, German industrial production had sunk to its lowest point since the pandemic lockdowns. Plant gates that had been open for generations now hung with chains. The warning was clear: if BASF could not make the math work, nobody could. And the consequences would ripple far beyond one company or one city, into the very core of Europe's economic future. Matteo is 25, a university graduate in Rome and still living in his childhood bedroom. His dreams of independence are buried under a pile of job rejections and sky-high rents. Italy's birth rate just hit 1.18 children per woman, the lowest since the country unified in 1861. In 2024, fewer than 370,000 babies were born across the entire country, a number that once belonged to a single city. The replacement rate is 2.1. Anything below 1.5 is a demographic alarm bell. At 1.18, the math is not just bad, it is terminal. Matteo's paycheck, when he gets one, disappears into a pension system built for a world that no longer exists. In the 1960s, 4 workers supported each retiree. By 2050, Italy and Spain will have fewer than 2 workers for every retiree. That means 2 young adults are on the hook for the full pensions, healthcare, and living expenses of a third person, and they still need to cover their own bills and taxes. The result is pension pressure and social strain. Taxes climb, the young leave, and the spiral tightens. Politicians cannot cut pensions without losing elections. Immigration sparks backlash. So the can gets kicked, debt piles up, and Matteo's generation shrinks away. The spiral accelerates. Europe's shrinking cradle is matched by a stalled frontier. Name a European smartphone. Nokia and Ericsson are gone. Name a European search engine. Silence. The modern economy is digital and Europe faces an innovation vacuum. The world's digital giants Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Nvidia, Meta, and Tesla have a combined market value bigger than the entire stock markets of the UK, France, Germany, and Italy combined. Europe invented the web at CERN, and DeepMind started in London, but the profits and the power now live in Silicon Valley. While American startups blitz through billion-dollar fundraising rounds, Europe writes rulebooks. The European Union wrote the AI Act before the continent produced a single AI giant. Mistral AI, a French startup with a shot at catching OpenAI, spends as much time wrangling GDPR, the Digital Markets Act, and the Digital Services Act as it does building new models. Each country brings its own language, currency, tax regime, and labour law. Scale becomes a mirage. When European startups do break through, they often get bought. DeepMind was bought by Google, Skype was bought by Microsoft, Booking.com was bought by an American holding company. In 2008, Europe claimed 30% of the world's top 100 companies. Today it is less than 14%. The continent that invented the modern economy now struggles to keep its brightest minds and boldest ideas from crossing the Atlantic. Arm Holdings, the company behind the blueprint for nearly every smartphone chip, started in Cambridge but chose to list on the Nasdaq in 2023. London lost out. The British tech jewel now trades alongside American giants. Spotify, BioNTech, and Birkenstock each raised capital in the United States. It is not a fluke. European investors hungry for returns send their money across the Atlantic. Norway's sovereign wealth fund, the continent's largest, puts most of its cash into American stocks. The reason is blunt: 0.5% in a European bank, or real growth on Wall Street. When capital leaves, so do companies, jobs, and futures. At the same time, energy costs have become a running joke. In 2023 and 2024, European factories paid 3 to 4 times more for electricity than their American or Chinese competitors. The United States runs on cheap shale gas, while Europe relies on imported liquefied natural gas, shipped thousands of miles at premium prices. Energy bills spike, collapse, and then spike again. Volatility is so wild that business planning feels like gambling. For many companies, the question is not growth, but survival. Europe's security umbrella, NATO, once let governments spend on pensions and hospitals instead of tanks. But hardly any European country met the 2% of GDP defence spending target. German soldiers drilled with broomsticks instead of rifles. The British Army would run out of ammunition in 2 days. When war returned to Europe, the consequences of decades of underspending were impossible to ignore. Security matters, and the price of ignoring it has arrived. In late 2024, Mario Draghi was asked to tally the cost of catching up. His answer was €800 billion a year, just to stay in the race. That is 2 Marshall Plans every year, indefinitely. The bill is so staggering it borders on satire, except no one is laughing. To pay it, Europe would need to unify finances, cut red tape, and act as a single power. But the math is impossible. 27 countries, one trench coat. The numbers do not work, and neither does the hope. Europe's economic future isn't a distant debate, it's unfolding now. With EU growth trailing the US by 74 percentage points since 2008, complacency carries a price. The numbers don't lie. Decline is a choice, not a fate. The next chapter depends on what Europe dares to do next.